The Lion Garden's demon has fallen, but the true dangers surrounding Chen Ping'an have only changed their faces. While the Azure Phoenix capital seethes over Zhu Fengxian's crushing defeat, Chen and Baozhen quietly move pieces across a far larger board, drawing old grudges and imperial schemes ever closer to Chen Ping'an's path. And now, on a lonely road beyond the reeds, a meeting neither side expected is finally about to occur. Someone has been arguing beside the tea stove about who finished the last plate of pastries, so I knew our usual band of wandering daoists couldn't be far away. Come in before the kettle boils dry. The jianghu has been especially troublesome while you were gone, and tonight's gossip involves emperors, grandmasters, schemers, and one very unlucky reunion. Keep your cup close. This tale may start politely, but I doubt everyone will leave with their dignity intact. The instant Chen Ping'an turned his attention toward the distance, Julian and Shi Ru both noticed the subtle change. Their eyes met for only a heartbeat, yet that brief glance was enough to confirm something unusual had entered their awareness.
You go first.
Shi Ru suppressed the familiar irritation Julian inspired in her. Even after another 100 years, she suspected this shameless old man's manner would remain every bit as aggravating.
I'm a yin entity. Capitals naturally restrain beings like me. Yet in the direction young master is looking, something has appeared that makes me deeply uneasy. What about you?
Julian nodded. But naturally, being Julian, he refused to answer without first stirring up trouble.
Young master sensed something and looked over. Then Lady Shi Ru immediately turned in the same direction with such a distant expression. Truly charming.
Even Pei Kaiyan understands that people should treat others sincerely. How can a shameless old man like you fail to understand something so simple?
That single word even immediately wounded an innocent bystander.
Big sister Shi Ru, what do you mean by even am very sincere too exclamation, and I'm diligent when I read and write. Okay.
Shi Ru could only look at the little girl apologetically. Pei Qian waved magnanimously, then immediately began stitching together fragments of sagely teachings with the confidence of someone who understood far less than she believed.
People aren't sages, so who can be without error every own beneath heaven can be forgiven.
The moment those words left her mouth, unease crept into Pei Qian's heart. Her instincts proved excellent. A heartbeat later, she yelped and rose onto her toes as Chen Ping'an seized her ear and marched her forward.
You barely understand these sagely principles, yet you already dare to parade your half-baked knowledge around.
Pei Qian apologized immediately. Her ear throbbed, but she had long since developed her own secret method for measuring her master's anger. A flick or a knuckle against the forehead meant Chen Ping'an was merely annoyed. Being dragged by the ear meant genuine anger. The harder he pulled, the worse the situation. Yet what frightened Pei Qian most was not punishment at all. It was Chen Ping'an becoming completely silent. When he neither scolded nor corrected her, she knew she had truly crossed a line. Before long, the group entered Changla region, one of the liveliest districts in the capital of the Azure Phoenix nation. Bookshops crowded the streets, scholars came and went, and travelers filled nearly every inn. Finding lodging, however, proved far more difficult than finding books. Rooms throughout the capital were scarce, and the inn Chen Ping'an chose had only 2 vacant rooms remaining. Worse still, they were separated and outrageously expensive. Behind the counter stood a young attendant wearing the unmistakable expression of a man who believed the situation needed no explanation. Pay the price, or leave. Chen Ping'an paid. Before they could settle in, the inn required their passports and travel documents for registration and later inspection by the capital authorities. Chen Ping'an calmly produced the documents Kui Dongshan had prepared in advance. The attendant checked them once, then twice. His arrogance vanished almost instantly. In a nation's capital, a travel document could reveal more than a sword at one's waist. Chen Ping'an had not threatened anyone, displayed cultivation, or invoked status. Yet the words, "Great Li Empire," were enough to change the atmosphere. This was the silent pressure of national power rather than personal martial strength. The attendant returned the documents with both hands and apologized profusely for his earlier behavior. He explained that the inn genuinely had no additional rooms, but promised to notify young Master Chen the moment another guest departed. Chen Ping'an merely smiled and accepted the arrangement. Soon afterward, a young woman from the inn arrived to guide the group toward their rooms. But the attendant did not stop there. The moment the travelers were gone, he hurried off to find the innkeeper and reported that guests from the great Li Empire's capital had traveled south and were now staying beneath their roof. The innkeeper was an enormously fat man, dressed in the brocade robes of a wealthy merchant. His narrow eyes were almost buried beneath his cheeks as he leisurely drank tea inside a quiet, elegant building. After hearing the report, he looked at the attendant, who remained standing there as though waiting for praise or an explanation. The innkeeper's temper erupted. He kicked the young man without hesitation.
"Why are you still standing here like an idiotto? You want me to pour tea for you to go? Attend to them! Exclamation. The great Li Empire's heavy cavalry has almost reached the luminous Vermilion Empire. What if that guest really is the young master of some great Li official's clanner? Forget it. I'll go myself. I can't trust you to handle anything properly."
The attendant had run all the way over expecting merit. Instead, he received a kick and a scolding. Resentment immediately began bubbling inside him. Then another heavy smack landed on his head.
"Even if I thought with my backside, I'd know you must have looked down on those guests before seeing their documents. If you weren't my brother-in-law, I would have thrown you onto the streets long ago."
The truth was difficult to deny. The young attendant had received the position only because of that family relationship. Only after returning to the counter did he dare curse silently, wondering how his beautiful elder sister had somehow ended up as the mistress of this obese, pig-headed merchant. Still, he had to admit that the arrangement had been remarkably fortunate for their family. Food and shelter were no longer problems. Fine clothing, gold, and silver had entered their lives. Whenever his elder sister returned to their old run-down alley, she looked almost like a noblewoman stepping down from a palace carriage. And as her younger brother, he naturally enjoyed some of that reflected glory. The innkeeper soon appeared personally before Chen Ping'an's group. Through whatever means necessary, he managed to free another room for them. That allowed Pei Qian and Shiro to share a room. Since Shiro did not need sleep and nighttime was ideal for her cultivation, Pei Qian could keep the entire bed to herself. Chen Ping'an did not simply decide the arrangement for them. Knowing that Shiru was a yin entity occupying Du Mao's immortal body, he first asked Pei Qian whether she felt uncomfortable sharing a room with her. Pei Qian had no objection. Shiru naturally agreed as well. Compared with sharing a room with Julian, anything else was preferable in Shiru's eyes. Being trapped beside that old man would have made her feel as though she had wandered directly into a predator's den. These were tiny matters, almost laughably small compared with cultivation, immortal treasures, or battles of life and death. Yet Chen Ping'an had learned from childhood that a journey was often made easier or harder by such details. If he handled the small discomforts carefully, his companions could reserve their attention for matters that truly demanded it. It was the same habit he had carried with him ever since escorting Li Baoping and the others toward Mountain Cliff Academy in the Great Sui Nation. Because their rooms were some distance apart, Pei Qian remained in Chen Ping'an's room for a while to transcribe texts. Chen Ping'an practiced the heaven and earth stance. Julian, with nothing else demanding his attention, stood in one corner and settled into an ape-like posture. For martial artists such as the far-roaming tier Julian and the fifth-tier Chen Ping'an, true cultivation was no longer confined to formal training. Walking could contain fist stances. Crossing mountains and rivers could become cultivation. Sitting could refine breathing. Even sleep could nurture fist intent. At their level, martial arts had begun to merge with ordinary existence. Pei Qian was still far too young to reach such a state. Nevertheless, both men had to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth about the martial path. even in a discipline famous for demanding slow, steady progress with no shortcuts, monstrous talent still existed. Pei Qian possessed precisely that kind of talent. Her progress could sometimes appear almost unfair. When Chen Ping'an had taught her the 18 stops technique in Old Dragon City's dust medicinal shop, she had grasped it with such speed that even her master had felt ashamed by comparison. Talent could let someone learn quickly, but Chen Ping'an's constant corrections reveal the other half of the matter. Without character and discipline, talent alone could become dangerous. Pei Qian's path was not merely about learning faster. It was about learning what deserved to be carried forward. Once Chen Ping'an completed the heaven and earth stance, he noticed the unmistakable eagerness in Julian's eyes. He understood immediately. Chen Ping'an asked Pei Qian, who had finished copying her texts, to take her hiking pole and draw a large circle on the floor. He and Julian would spar inside it. Whoever stepped outside first would lose. The rule was simple, but it awakened an old memory. During Chen Ping'an's long-awaited confrontation with Ma Kuxuan on the streets of the colorful garment nation, the two young men had used precisely this method to determine victory. That earlier contest had carried far darker undercurrents. If Ma Kuxuan's Dao guardian from True Martial Mountain had not watched from nearby with cold detachment, the two men born in Clay Vase Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley might very well have fought until only one remained standing. Chen Ping'an would never show mercy toward Ma Kuxuan, simply because they came from the same small town. Ma Kuxuan's parents had obtained control of a dragon kiln very early, and between the two sides lay both old grievances and new ones. Chen Ping'an was not yet rushing to settle those scores because he still lacked the complete truth. But once every hidden thread was finally combed straight, his temperament suggested something very clear. He would settle everything together, cleanly and without leaving unfinished debts behind. Pei Qian finished drawing the circle, though a small frustration lingered in her heart. Before Kui Dongshan departed, he had taught her an immortal technique. No matter how many times she tried, however, she could not reproduce it. Inside the circle, roughly 3 meters in radius, Chen Ping'an and Julian faced one another. Then fists began to fly. Julian naturally suppressed his cultivation base, just as Zhang Dafeng had once done while sparring against Chen Ping'an and the 3 martial artists from the picture scrolls. Suppressing one's realm did not make Julian harmless. A master could lower raw power, but experience, timing, body control, and battle instinct remained. For Chen Ping'an, that made this kind of sparring more valuable than simply exchanging overwhelming blows. For 15 minutes, the cramped room became a miniature martial arena. Steps shifted by inches. Fists cut through narrow openings. Every retreat threatened the boundary. Then Julian's fist blasted Chen Ping'an backward. Chen Ping'an landed with both feet still inside the circle, but Julian was already there. An elbow struck his chest before he could fully stabilize himself. His body crashed downward. Barely a foot from the floor, Chen Ping'an slammed both palms against the ground and twisted through the air like a spinning top. His wide sleeves spiraled around him as his feet skimmed dangerously close to the inner edge of the circle. He shuffled to Julian's flank. Julian answered with a kick straight to the chest. Chen Ping'an shot toward the wall. He threw both hands behind his back and braced them against it, dispersing much of the force before impact. Without that control, Julian's kick could easily have sent him through far more than a single wall. Yet Chen Ping'an landed lightly on the floor instead.
I lost.
There was no frustration in his admission. A loss in sparring was simply another piece of the martial path to understand. Julian smiled. He had noticed something interesting during their exchange.
Young master, you used quite a few strange techniques just now. Did you steal them from that final battle in the lotus flower blessed land, perhaps from Ding Ying, the fellow who later took my Daoist hat?
Ding Ying knew an enormous variety of martial techniques. I learned quite a few things from fighting him.
The two men sat down. Julian poured Chen Ping'an a cup of tea, and his joking demeanor gradually gave way to remembrance.
Ding Ying was the most talented martial artist I ever encountered. He was meticulous as well, and even when he was young, one could already see the ambition inside him. During our battle in the Southern Garden Nation, I knew I could advance no further. No matter how I tried, I could not release the fist intent I had accumulated throughout my life. I was already badly wounded, yet Ding Ying still refused to appear until the very end. He waited until the safest possible moment. In truth, killing him then would have been effortless, no more difficult than crushing a newborn chick. But I spared him. I even gave him the Daoist hat left behind by an otherworldly immortal. Over the next 60 years, that young man not only lived up to my expectations, his ambitions eventually became even greater than my own.
That single choice changed the martial history of the Lotus Flower Blessed Land. Julian had possessed the strength to erase Ding Ying before the latter reached his peak, yet instead he left behind both a life and an opportunity. Decades later, that spared youth became one of the greatest obstacles Chen Ping'an would face there. Chen Ping'an finally understood another hidden corner of Ding Ying's past.
No wonder Ding Ying kept that battle secret and never spoke of it. He was probably too ashamed to boast about it, and he certainly wouldn't want others learning where his weaknesses had once been.
Pei Chun, meanwhile, cared less about martial history than about the suffering Ding Ying had caused her master.
You might not know this, but that old geezer made my master suffer quite a lot.
Julian's smile widened immediately.
Then if I'd known that beforehand, I should have killed Ding Ying with one punch back then, right?
Pei Chun nearly answered on instinct. Then she remembered the ear-pulling from earlier. She first looked at Chen Ping'an. Then she looked at Julian's thoroughly punchable expression. A trap! The old cook had dug a pit for her and was probably standing nearby with a shovel, ready to bury her the instant she jumped in. Pei Chun shook her head decisively.
No, that's not right.
Chen Ping'an made no move to reward her with a knuckle against the forehead. Pei Chun immediately knew she had survived the test. She carefully packed away the brush, ink, and paper, placing everything back inside Chen Ping'an's bamboo bookcase. Then she poured herself a cup of tea. Suddenly, she stood and leaned closer to her master.
Master, I don't know why, but when I read now, the characters in the books suddenly look much prettier than before.
Chen Ping'an did not think much of the remark.
How so?
Pei Chun lowered her voice even further, making a deliberate effort to prevent Julian from eavesdropping.
Those little blocks of ink used to seem dark and ordinary to me. Now they feel completely different. Who do they remind me of?
She began counting names on her fingers.
There's Huang Ting, who taught me sword and saber technique. Then Yao Jinzhai, Fan Junmao with her bad temper, and Jin Su who accompanies Aunt Gui.
Pei Chun suddenly remembered that one of her descriptions required immediate legal clarification.
And let me explain first! Old man Y was the one who said Big Sister Jinzhai had foxy, bewitching brows and beauty, capable of bringing catastrophe to a nation. I didn't invent that exclamation. I don't even understand what foxy brows are supposed to mean.
Julian immediately erupted into roaring laughter.
Oh, you can piss off with that excuse.
Pei Chun charged at him immediately, reaching for the source of all gossip and rubbish, the old cook's mouth. Naturally, Julian refused to be silenced. His head swayed left and right with effortless precision while Pei Chun bared her teeth and flailed after him. Watching the old man and the little girl begin another ridiculous battle, Chen Ping'an finally reminded everyone of their actual itinerary.
Once we've bought what we need in the capital, we'll visit a few famous places. At most, we'll remain here another 2 days. After that, we'll head to the immortal ferry station in the eastern region of the Azure Phoenix Nation and travel directly to Mountain Cliff Academy in the Great Sui Nation.
The plan sounded peaceful: shopping, sightseeing, then departure. Yet Shiru's earlier unease hung quietly behind that ordinary schedule. Something in the capital had disturbed a yin entity and caught Chen Ping'an's attention at the same time. Whether it would remain merely a distant presence was another matter entirely. Still dodging Pei Qian, Julian nodded obediently.
There's no need to worry about this old servant, young master, but we should keep an eye on this unruly little girl. She's like a wild horse without reins. We can't let her become another ox-drawn carriage, charging headfirst into a thicket of reeds.
Zhu Lion! You're always jinxing me. Keep it up and I'll really get serious with you.
Julian opened his mouth, clearly preparing another attack. Chen Ping'an unexpectedly intervened first.
Indeed. You shouldn't keep jinxing things for us.
Julian changed sides without even the slightest hesitation.
Young master is correct.
Pei Qian finally found the opening she had been waiting for. She sat down, clutched her stomach, pointed at Julian, and laughed until she nearly folded over.
And you still dare accuse me of flimsy convictions and swaying loyalty, old cook. You can piss off with that. Hey.
Julian immediately put on the solemn expression of a scholar preparing to explain a profound truth.
Your behavior is called sitting on the fence without firm convictions. My behavior is called wisely adjusting to circumstances. There is a fundamental difference.
He paused just long enough to make the next statement sound even more shameless.
Indeed, the behavior of a wise and handsome individual.
Pei Qian blinked.
I heard Master say that in our home world, the lotus flower-blessed land, you were once a peerlessly handsome young master.
For one glorious heartbeat, Julian believed someone had finally opened the door for him to recount his legendary youth. He did not even get the chance to begin. Pei Qian collapsed over the table, clutching her belly and pounding her head against the wood as laughter burst from her in waves.
You can piss off with that nonsense. Yehahaha! You're going to make me laugh to death! Oh my tummy hurts.
Even Chen Ping'an was struggling to hold back his laughter. Julian looked from Pei Qian to his young master and suddenly felt a faint melancholy that no martial arts technique could resolve. And perhaps that was the strangest charm of this journey. One moment, ancient grudges, martial realms, ominous entities, and the shadow of national power pressed against them. The next, an old far-roaming tier martial artist was being laughed into silence by a little girl. In the jianghu, danger and warmth often traveled the same road. The grand debate between Buddhism and Taoism was nearing its final breath. Across the Azure Phoenix Nation, scholars argued beneath lanterns, monks defended doctrine inside ancient halls, and Taoist priests weighed heaven and earth with words sharper than swords. Yet while the eyes of the realm remained fixed upon that contest, another meeting was quietly unfolding beyond the capital, one whose consequences might prove far more important than any victory won upon the debating platform. Near the outskirts of the capital stood a secluded summer palace. Emperor Tangli had secretly arrived there to receive an esteemed guest. Though he ruled countless subjects and carried the mandate of an entire mortal dynasty upon his shoulders, this was one visitor he did not dare neglect. That guest was Zhang Mao of the Cloud Forest Zhang clan, an old immortal of the upper 5 tiers and one of the great pillars supporting his ancient clan. His importance did not come from cultivation alone. Within the Zhang clan, he was also a revered teacher, entrusted with educating generations of descendants. In the cultivation world, strength could force others to lower their heads, but the authority to shape an entire clan's descendants carried another kind of weight. Zhang Mao possessed both. Before such a figure, the crown of a mortal emperor could no longer guarantee superiority. Jiang Mao had not come alone, Also returning was a direct disciple of the Jiang clan who had married into Old Dragon City's Fu clan and was now visiting her homeland for the first time since that marriage. At her side remained the old maidservant who had accompanied her to the Fu clan. Rumor claimed that this seemingly humble attendant was actually a nascent-tier sword cultivator, and that when her sword truly left its sheath, the destruction she could unleash was terrifying. Walking beside Emperor Tang Li were two elderly men of the Azure Phoenix nation. The first was Tang Chong, a senior member of the imperial family, and a man to whom the emperor could temporarily entrust power without fear of betrayal. In terms of generation, Tang Chong could even be regarded as Tang Li's uncle. Tang Chong had once exchanged numerous private letters with former Assistant Minister Liu Jingting. Their correspondence had hardly been polite agreement. The two men had argued repeatedly through ink and paper, yet every one of those exchanges had eventually passed before Emperor Tang Li's eyes. The second old man had an aquiline nose and an aura far removed from ordinary officials. His name was Zhou Lingji, the foremost cultivator among all official immortals serving the Azure Phoenix nation. Once, Zhou Lingji had wandered the mountains and rivers as a vagrant cultivator, but that past had faded from public memory. What people remembered now was that he had already served beneath 3 different emperors of the Azure Phoenix nation. His reputation was far from spotless. Tang Li simply did not care. The emperor had grown up among the schemes, burdens, and calculations of royalty. His ambition reached beyond maintaining a comfortable reign. He wanted to swallow surrounding lands and forge an Azure Phoenix nation capable of enduring for tens of thousands of years. For an emperor thinking in terms of dynasties rather than individual lifetimes, complaints about a cultivator's reputation were small matters. Tang Li valued usefulness, power, and whether a person could help protect the nation. Morality mattered, but survival mattered first. Even so, regardless of how coldly Tang Li might ordinarily treat mountain immortals within his own borders, the arrival of Jiang Mao changed everything. Before this elder of the Cloud Forest Jiang clan, the emperor could only welcome him with the courtesy of a junior. Soon, the two sides took their seats opposite one another. Their positions appeared deliberately arranged, so that there would be no obvious distinction between host and guest. There would certainly be no suggestion of ruler and subject. The seating itself was already a declaration. Inside a mortal court, Tang Li sat above 10,000 people. Here, political etiquette quietly admitted that imperial authority had reached its boundary. Beyond that boundary stood cultivation clans whose history and strength could rival entire nations. Tang Li had expected Jiang Mao to carry the arrogance of an ancient clan elder. Instead, the old immortal appeared warm and genial, his manner almost surprisingly easygoing. At the emperor's instruction, an external official from the Ministry of Rites approached with a thick stack of documents and several picture scrolls. The scrolls contained reproductions of stone tablets made through immortal techniques, preserving important scenes and records from the grand debate between Buddhism and Taoism. The official was a proper-looking young man with an exceptionally clear tongue. While Jiang Mao casually turned through the documents and scrolls, the young official recounted the course of the grand debate. His skill was obvious. He knew exactly which details deserved emphasis and which should pass swiftly. When the debate reached a delightful exchange, or a moment capable of stirring the heart, he slowed and gave it proper weight. Everywhere else he remained crisp and concise. Most impressive of all, he neither groveled nor displayed arrogance before an upper 5 tiers old immortal. When Jiang Mao questioned him, every answer came appropriately and without confusion. A court official could not compete with Jiang Mao in cultivation, but he could still defend the dignity of his emperor through composure and competence. In a meeting where every gesture represented national face, that was its own kind of battlefield. Tang Li was clearly pleased. He turned slightly toward Tang Chong. and quietly asked about the young official's background.
He is Song Xianxia, a secretary of the Ministry of Rites Bureau of Ceremonies, and a descendant of the Song clan of Green Pine Prefecture. During the imperial examination in the second year of Kyukui, he placed second.
Tang Li gave the matter only a moment's consideration.
Raise his results during the next evaluation.
Tang Chong smiled and nodded. No further explanation was necessary. Tang Li rewarded ability immediately. One successful performance before the right eyes could alter an official's future. Such was the imperial court. Opportunity might take years to prepare for, yet the moment that decided everything could last only a few breaths. Then Tang Li suddenly noticed another absence.
Why isn't Chief Military Governor Y here today?
Chief Military Governor Y has a good relationship with someone named Jiang Yun of the Jiang clan. Jiang Yun is reuniting with his older sister here, so he dragged Chief Military Governor Y along with him.
Zhou Lingji sat nearby in silence. Yet the instant he heard Tang Li casually address that person as Chief Military Governor Wei, his eyelids gave the faintest twitch. Throughout the southeastern region of the Eastern Treasured Vial continent, people knew of a Chief Military Governor, Wei, whose position had supposedly passed down through generation after generation. Each generation of the Wei clan had only a single direct descendant, and yet, no matter how dangerous the circumstances became, the lineage never broke. The Tang clan had founded the Azure Phoenix nation long ago. Since then, one emperor after another had ascended the throne and eventually disappeared into history. Yet the so-called succession of chief military governors concealed an astonishing truth. From the founding of the nation until the present day, the chief military governor of the Wei clan had always been the same person. Wei Lang. His relationship with the imperial Tang clan ran extraordinarily deep. He concealed both influence and power, remaining almost invisible beneath the surface of the nation. And among every person in the Azure Phoenix nation, Wei Liang was the one Zhou Lingji feared most, not merely one of several dangerous figures. The one. That tiny movement of Zhou Lingji's eyelids revealed more than 100 grand declarations could have. When the nation's foremost official immortal instinctively reacted to a single name, Wei Liang's hidden depth became far more frightening than any public reputation. After reviewing the documents and hearing the Ministry of Rites official's account, Jiang Mao finally shifted the discussion toward the Lion Garden.
I heard that Liu Qingxian of the Lion Garden performed exceptionally well after being added to the examination at the last moment. Apart from these written records, are there any picture scrolls I can examine?
Tang Chong shook his head.
Senior Jiang, we received a warning that it would be best not to enter the Lion Garden without permission. Even guest Elder Zhu could only observe from a mountain peak outside the estate. However, between the reports sent by spies inside the Lion Garden and a conservative observation of the situation through guest Elder Zhu's palm, we confirmed one thing. Liu Jingting's second son, Liu Qingxian, relied upon his own ability to pass the examination. He received no outside assistance.
Jiang Mao's expression remained relaxed.
Wasn't the person who warned you simply Qiu Chan, imperial preceptor of the great Lai Empire? There is no need to treat his name as some forbidden taboo.
Tang Chong answered with an easy smile.
Indeed, it was imperial preceptor Qiu.
Emperor Tang Li remained composed, but displeasure quietly stirred beneath the surface. The great momentum sweeping across the continent had already forced the Azure Phoenix nation to cooperate with the Great Li Empire and Kui Chan, entering schemes whose scale extended far beyond ordinary court politics. Tang Li understood perfectly well that in any contest of planning against the embroidered tiger, he had already fallen into a severe disadvantage. Yet Zhang Mao had just spoken Kui Chan's name with almost careless calm. There was no fear, no hesitation, and certainly no awe. To Tang Li, that casual tone carried an unpleasant implication. If the Cloud Forest Jiang clan did not even place the great Li Empire and Kui Chan particularly high in its eyes, then what value could its courteous treatment of the Azure Phoenix nation truly hold? If they looked down upon the tiger, how much respect could they possibly have for the fox standing beside it? The emperor revealed none of that frustration. His face remained perfectly calm. Tang Li understood the brutal simplicity of his position. If Zhang Mao chose to spit directly in his face, the emperor might still have to smile, accept the humiliation, and politely ask whether the old immortal was thirsty and desired tea. That was not cowardice so much as the mathematics of power. An emperor could afford personal pride only when the price of that pride would not be paid by his entire nation. Tang Li's crown gave him authority, but it also chained him to consequences. Fortunately, Zhang Mao did not continue pressing upon this uncomfortable point. Instead, he selected several picture scrolls showing two individuals at two separate locations. One location stood south of the capital, White Water Temple, famous for its refreshing spring water. The other lay within the capital itself, the comparatively obscure White Cloud Daoist Temple. The first figure was a young monk dressed in a white kasaya. The second was the middle-aged temple master of White Cloud Daoist Temple. Zhang Mao studied them before offering his judgment.
Judging from the current situation, Buddhism has won the battle on the surface, while Taoism has gained the advantage in the hidden contest. Liu Qingxian of the Lion Garden, whom the Confucian scholars of your Azure Phoenix nation put forward, has also performed remarkably. He may still possess an opportunity, but unless the Confucian side produces something more impressive, it can fight for second place at most.
Then, the old immortal's seemingly mild words sharpened.
Is that enough whether Buddhism or Taoism ultimately becomes the new national religion of the Azure Phoenix nation? Will that truly be a good result for either of them?
The pressure hidden inside the question was unmistakable. The Cloud Forest. Jiang clan was among the oldest of the great clans in the eastern treasured Vile continent. In ancient times, it had even been regarded as a major first-rate clan within the Middle-earth Divine Continent. Long before the Confucian sect itself had been founded, the Jiang clan had already overseen matters of etiquette. Thus, in this unprecedented contest among the traditions taking place in the eastern treasured Vile continent, there was little mystery regarding which side the Jiang clan wished to see elevated. Yet the matter could not be handled crudely. If the Azure Phoenix nation simply ignored the grand debate between Buddhism and Taoism and forcibly raised Confucianism to first place and the status of national religion because the Cloud Forest Jiang clan desired it, any intelligent observer would immediately see the Jiang clan's hand behind the throne. And the Jiang clan would never willingly allow its pristine reputation to be dirtied by such obvious interference. This was what made serving the Cloud Forest Jiang clan so exhausting. They wanted the result, but they also demanded that every step leading toward that result appear perfectly proper. Winning was not sufficient. The victory had to look natural, righteous, and beyond criticism. In other words, Tang Li was being asked to move the pieces while making the entire board believe no hand had ever touched them. That kind of demand could be more dangerous than facing an enemy who simply drew a sword. Meanwhile, scholars from the central regions of the eastern treasured Vile continent were traveling south in enormous numbers and gathering inside the Azure Phoenix nation. Many were already deeply dissatisfied, that Confucian scholars had not formally participated in the grand debate between Buddhism and Taoism. Influential clans and celebrated individuals from distant territories loudly expressed their displeasure. Some proud local clans with notoriously fierce tempers went even further, threatening to abandon the Azure Phoenix nation entirely if either Buddhism or Taoism replaced Confucianism as the nation's chosen faith. But those standing at the true center of the Azure Phoenix imperial court understood something the crowds outside did not. Buddhism and Taoism were not truly fighting for first place. They were struggling for second. More precisely, they were fighting not to finish last. The Taoist immortals knew this. The eminent Buddhist monks knew it as well. So beneath the magnificent speeches about doctrine and enlightenment lay a colder political truth. Everyone understood that the apparent contest and the real contest were not the same battle. The public saw three teachings competing for influence. The insiders saw a predetermined first place and two great traditions maneuvering to avoid humiliation. Elsewhere, even the emperor of the Fortune Mountain nation had brought his beloved concubines to the Azure Phoenix nation, largely because he wanted to witness the spectacle personally. He wanted to see exactly how shameless Emperor Tang Li would be forced to become. Could Tang Li satisfy the Cloud Forest Jiang clan while simultaneously appeasing the vast tide of scholars marching south? Would he become a joke across half of the eastern treasured vile continent? Or would his handling of the matter somehow end with Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism all offended at once? For anyone watching from outside, this was almost entertaining. For Tang Li, it was a blade suspended above the dynasty. One careless choice could cost far more than face. It could reshape alliances, offend cultivation powers, and weaken the legitimacy of his throne. Yet the emperor merely wore a faint smile. One finger extended and slowly stroked the surface of the tea table before him, as if the surrounding pressure were nothing more than ripples on still water. Then Tang Chong revealed the card that had been kept hidden until now.
In truth, the person Imperial Preceptor Qi Chan of the Great Lai Empire actually put forward was not Liu Qingxian. It was Liu Qingfeng, Liu Jingting's eldest son. He is a Confucian disciple of impressive learning, though his scholarship leans toward legalism.
Zhang Mao's eyes narrowed with genuine interest.
Oh, what makes him different from everyone? Elsie would very much like to know.
Tang Chong rose from his seat. He had clearly anticipated that the conversation might reach this point, for he immediately produced two old, yellowing books prepared in advance. One was a Confucian classic, the other was a legalist scripture. Tang Chong had barely begun walking toward Zhang Mao when the old immortal moved without moving. The two books suddenly slipped free from Tang Chong's hands, crossed the space between them, and appeared neatly upon the table before Zhang Mao. There was no grand display of spiritual light, no thunderous pressure, and no need for Zhang Mao to rise. A casual thought had been enough. Sometimes the most frightening demonstrations of cultivation are precisely those without spectacle. Zhang Mao did not need to announce his realm. The ease with which the impossible became ordinary around him already explained everything. Zhang Mao glanced at the Confucian classic and casually pushed it toward the corner of the table. He had no intention of wasting even a moment upon it. After all, how many people in the entire eastern treasured vile continent were qualified to discuss propriety before the Cloud Forest Zhang clan? This was not merely Zhang Mao's vanity. On the subject of etiquette and propriety, both he and his clan possessed an accumulation of knowledge vast enough to justify such confidence. The legalist scripture, however, received an entirely different treatment. This was the book Liu Qingfeng had personally studied and annotated. Jiang Mao began turning its pages at startling speed. At some passages, his expression remained indifferent. At others, he gave a faint approving nod. Eventually his hand stopped. His gaze rested upon a particular legalist maxim. Do not fawn over those you favor, do not harm those you dislike, and let the law govern both affection and resentment. This is the paramount way to rule a nation. Beside that sentence were annotations written by Liu Qingfeng on what appeared to be 3 separate occasions. The earliest note challenged a single word in the original passage. The character paramount is inappropriate. It is too lofty. Fundamental would be more suitable. That small correction revealed the direction of Liu Qingfeng's thinking. He was not merely memorizing ancient doctrine, he was willing to question the authority of the text itself, lowering an absolute claim into something more practical and grounded. For a scholar leaning toward legalism, that distinction between the highest principle and a fundamental principle was anything but trivial. Jiang Mao continued to the 2nd and 3rd annotations. Whatever Liu Qingfeng had written there caused the old immortal's expression to soften into a faint smile.
Not bad.
Then, Jiang Mao's next words transformed Liu Qingfeng's private study notes into a weapon for another battlefield.
We can use this to test that Daoist priest from White Cloud, Daoist temple.
On the surface, Jiang Mao possessed the highest cultivation base within the Cloud Forest Jiang clan. Yet at this moment, what he displayed was not destructive might, but the calculating patience of someone accustomed to moving people through ideas rather than force. With casual ease, the old immortal tore that page from the legalist scripture. The remaining 2 books then returned across the table to Tang Chong. Jiang Mao smiled.
Find an opportunity in the near future for the temple master of White Cloud Daoist Temple to coincidentally obtain this book. Then watch carefully, see how he reacts, and listen to what he said.
Tang Chong accepted the request without objection. And with that, the nature of the contest changed again. No sword had been drawn, no spell had been cast. Yet a single torn page was about to become a probe aimed directly at the heart of a Taoist cultivator's thinking. Jiang Mao was not merely asking what the White Cloud Temple Master believed. He intended to discover how that man would respond when confronted with Liu Qingfeng's interpretation of law, emotion, and rulership. For those following the struggle over the Azure Phoenix nation's future, this may be the most revealing development yet. The grand debate appears to concern Buddhism and Taoism, while Confucianism waits outside the formal arena. But Cui-chan has placed Liu Qingfeng upon another path entirely, and Jiang Mao has now chosen to test that path for himself. When great clans, imperial courts, scholars, monks, Taoists, and the embroidered tiger all begin moving separate pieces toward the same board, the final victor may not be decided by the loudest debate at all. Elsewhere in the Summer Palace, far from the invisible currents gathering around Jiang Mao's building, another scene unfolded beneath a sea of emerald bamboo. Wind whispered through the leaves, sunlight slipped between the stalks, and inside a quiet pavilion, laughter replaced schemes and calculation. Jiang Yun sat there with his elder sister, speaking as naturally as they had in younger days. He was the tall, sturdy cultivator who had entered the jewel-small world and emerged with a faded iron chain. Yet outside the mountains he still called the humble alley of Wasptail Ferry Station home. His elder sister had already married into Old Dragon City. Chief Military Governor Wei Liang sat nearby, casually conversing with the old maidservant, whose usual spirit seemed strangely absent today. Jiang Yun studied his sister's current appearance, and found himself caught between laughter and helplessness.
What are you judging a book by its covery? Think this appearance is quite beautiful.
Big sister, speaking from the bottom of my heart, your current appearance may be the complete opposite of beauty.
His sister rolled her eyes. She was hardly the sort of woman who would lose a battle of words to her younger brother.
Then I truly cannot wait to see what sort of celestial maiden you marry someday. I'll personally give you advice, otherwise some bewitching vixen might trick you before you even realize it.
Jiang Yun immediately pressed his palms together, as though facing a calamity greater than any immortal tribulation.
Please spare me, big sister. With that temper of yours, I'm more afraid you'll frighten my future wife away before I can even introduce her.
The young woman was already preparing a counterattack, but Jiang Yun understood his sister far too well. Before the blade of her tongue could descend, he changed battlefields.
Big sister, what kind of person is Funan Hua?
Not bad. He's an all-right person. We don't interfere with one another, and we treat each other with respect. For people like us, that's already about as good as it gets.
Jiang Yun burst into laughter. The answer was peaceful enough, yet in his ears it sounded like the perfect foundation for comradeship with a long-suffering brother-in-law.
Then I absolutely have to drink with that pitiful brother-in-law of mine one day. The two of us can complain about our hardships for several days without stopping. Who knows, who might even become close friends.
Do whatever you want.
Then a thought suddenly crossed her mind. Her teasing faded, replaced by the curiosity of someone born into a powerful cultivation clan, someone who understood exactly how rare certain treasures truly were.
Your master went treasure hunting with his good friend. Did they succeed? If they did, you could secretly take me to Wasptail Ferry Station. I still haven't personally seen the colored glaze golden body, left behind by a deceased Ascension tier cultivator. Our family has one too, but the old ancestor keeps it hidden so tightly that I haven't managed to catch even a glimpse after all these years. Help your big sister sneak over for one look, and I'll give you a special present. I guarantee every young cultivator on the continent would be jealous.
Jiang Yun rejected the temptation almost before she finished speaking.
Forget it. My master's temper is no better than yours. If I dare touch anything concerning that colored glaze golden body without permission, he'll truly try to skin me alive. I'm not exaggerating.
He then began recounting the eccentric logic of his master, and the more he spoke, the more helpless his expression became.
Back then, he gave me two choices. Either enter the Jewel Small World or train in the Blessed Land belonging to the Divine Edict sect. I had to choose one. But after I returned from the Jewel Small World, he regretted his own words and decided I should visit the Blessed Land as well. His reasoning was that since I had already obtained one opportunity, why not make it a happy double? He even said I should take advantage of my good fortune these 2 years. Since I found a treasure in the small world, maybe I'll find myself a beautiful wife in the Blessed Land too. How am I supposed to reason with such a shameless master?
Yet beneath Jiang Yun's complaints lay an extraordinary fact. His master was no ordinary wandering cultivator. In a world where sect inheritance, bloodline, and resources decided countless destinies, receiving guidance from such a figure was already a fortune many cultivators could pursue for lifetimes without obtaining. His sister naturally understood this better than most.
You truly don't understand how fortunate you are. Across the entire history of the Eastern treasured vile continent, how many vagrant cultivators ever reached the upper 5 tiers? How many could earn the sincere respect of someone as proud as Lai Tuanjing, and how many could become close friends with that strange old gang leader? Be content. When you have time, go home, burn incense for our ancestors, and thank them for whatever good karma they accumulated on your behalf.
The humor in Jiang Yun's eyes disappeared. His answer was quiet, almost indifferent. Yet that very indifference carried the weight of something he had never truly put down.
Don't try to persuade me to go back. I genuinely cannot bring myself to return to that place.
His sister sighed and flicked him on the forehead, just as she might have done when they were children.
You've been this stubborn since childhood. You're already an immortal of the mountains now. Can you still not let go of what happened before?
Jiang Yun gave no answer. Sometimes cultivation could carry a person above clouds and mountains, yet it could not automatically erase the footprints left in the heart. Jiang Yun had crossed into the world of immortals, but whatever waited behind the word home still possessed enough weight to silence him. He glanced toward the listless old maidservant. His sister immediately shook her head, softly warning him not to ask. As brother and sister fell silent, Wei Liang and the old maidservant happened to turn their conversation toward the Bamboo Sea, Small World, and Lady Qingxian. Wei Liang swept his gaze over the endless green bamboo surrounding the pavilion. What followed sounded half like a joke and half like a declaration whose true meaning only he understood.
Virtuous men, noble men, and scholars all admire green bamboo. As for me, I want to chop down tens of thousands of stalks of this wicked bamboo.
Mister, why? Surely it wouldn't be appropriate to start chopping bamboo here, while ignoring our old ancestor, who is waiting to debate knowledge with you.
If I sit over there, I'll attract far too much attention. That would be a failure of my duty as an official.
Zhang Yun's sister was just preparing another barb when Wei Liang narrowed his eyes with a smile and struck first.
Little Jiang, do you remember when I used to carry you as a baby? Time truly flies. In the blink of an eye, that tanned little girl in the cot has grown up and married.
The young woman glared at him. Without another word, she took out a piece of raw ginger, the same sharp snack she had loved since childhood, and bit into it with obvious displeasure. Wei Liang erupted in hearty laughter. Zhang Yun could only look at the chief military governor with deep admiration. In this particular battle of words, Wei Liang had clearly won. Meanwhile, near the capital, the lion garden was gradually emptying. The demon that had terrorized the estate was finally gone. With danger dispersed, outsiders began departing, and even members of the Liu family who had remained gathered there started setting out on their own roads. Liu Jingting's eldest daughter, Liu Qingya, was the first to leave in haste with her husband. She had been stranded at her childhood home far longer than expected, while her husband had been thoroughly frightened by everything they had experienced. Once bitten, twice shy, he clearly had no wish to linger near another demon-haunted estate. After them, the two teachers, Fu Sheng and Mr. Liu, departed together. Then came Liu Jingting's second son, Liu Qingshan, and Daoist nun Liu Boqi. Their horses were prepared for a long journey north, with Lakeview Academy as their first destination. Soon afterward, Liu Qingqing and her maidservant Zhao Ya also left the lion garden. Their destination was no mortal city, but an immortal force hidden among the mountains. Liu Qingfeng had taken leave from the imperial court to personally escort his younger sister. The mountain force stood roughly 300 kilometers from the capital of the Azure Phoenix nation, and during Liu Jingting's years as assistant minister, he had cultivated a respectable relationship with it. Liu Jingting prepared generous gifts and entrusted Liu Qingfeng with a letter. Its request was humble. Even if Liu Qingqing possessed poor aptitude and lacked cultivation talent, he hoped the mountain force would accept her, even merely as an unofficial disciple who could remain there for several years. Yet the humility of that letter concealed the reality of Liu Jingting's status. Though he had resigned from the Ministry of Rites, his name still carried enormous weight throughout the Azure Phoenix nation. As long as he lived, finding a mountain sect willing to receive his daughter was hardly difficult. The letter was courtesy, not desperation. The two horse-drawn carriages rolled steadily toward the mountains, with every stretch of road separating her from the memories of the lion garden. Liu Qingqing smiled a little more. Seeing her young mistress recover her spirits, Zhao Ya naturally became cheerful as well. Most of the journey, Liu Qingfeng remained inside his carriage with a book in hand. Yet whenever they stopped at a relay station, the quiet scholar stepped outside and personally interacted with the officials and local personnel. These exchanges were not empty etiquette. Whether a man was a low-ranking official or merely a petty functionary, anyone who survived within officialdom possessed sharp eyes. Liu Qingfeng was a county magistrate and technically their superior. They could easily tell the difference between sincere respect and condescending politeness. Yet Liu Qingfeng never carried himself like the lofty eldest son of Liu Jingting, leader of the Azure Phoenix Nation's scholarly world. He spoke naturally, treated each person seriously, and left favorable impressions wherever he passed. Before long, his name became a subject of casual conversation among the relay stations along the route. Liu Qingqing was still young and naturally failed to grasp all the layers behind her elder brother's conduct. Zhao Ya, however, observed far more carefully. To Zhao Ya, the difference was striking. Inside the Lion Garden, Liu Qingfeng had seemed like one person. On the road, County Magistrate Liu Qingfeng became another. This was not hypocrisy. It was the discipline of someone who understood that governing people required more than learning, pedigree, or a famous father. When the carriages finally reached the immortal forest nestled among green mountain peaks, everything proceeded smoothly. Liu Qingqing met the immortals and was formally accepted as a disciple. After ensuring that his younger sister was properly settled, Liu Qingfeng did not descend the mountain immediately. Someone led him toward a tall, scenic viewing building beside a cliff. Step by step, he climbed to the top floor, where mountain winds swept across the railings and distant peaks disappeared into mist. There stood an old Confucian scholar in azure robes, calmly admiring the landscape. Beside him waited a handsome young man. The instant Liu Qingfeng recognized the elder, complicated thoughts surged through him. He suppressed every one of them, straightened his robes, and bowed.
Liu Qingfeng pays his respects to Imperial Preceptor Q.
The azure-robed elder was Kuichan, Imperial Preceptor of the great Li Empire. And he had personally come all the way to the Azure Phoenix Nation. That single appearance changed the weight of the meeting. An Imperial Preceptor did not cross borders merely to admire mountains. Kuichan's presence meant that pieces had already been placed on a board far larger than the Liu family's private affairs. Kuichan smiled and made a gentle lifting gesture, telling Liu Qingfeng there was no need for excessive ceremony. Then he indicated the handsome young man beside him.
This is Lai Baozhen from Dragon Spring Prefecture. He currently leads the southeastern division of Great Lai's Green Ripple Pavilion. The two of you will be working together quite often in the future.
Li Baozhen immediately bowed.
Greetings, Mr. Liu.
Liu Qingfeng had little choice but to return the courtesy. Li Baozhen spoke next in fluent Azure Phoenix official dialect. His words sounded courteous, but they carried the unmistakable sharpness of someone testing another man's depth.
Mr. Liu, this journey south has greatly broadened my horizons. The Azure Phoenix Nation truly possesses many remarkable people. That Daoist priest from White Cloud Daoist Temple is one example. His cultivation base is low, yet he dared to integrate with Dao and extract profound secrets. More astonishingly, he actually succeeded in crossing a gulf that even nascent tier Earth immortals find extraordinarily difficult. Unfortunately, his actions were far too conspicuous. Whether the matter becomes fortune or disaster will probably depend on the attitude of the Cloud Forest Jiang clan.
Liu Qingfeng merely smiled. He offered no comment at all. Was Li Baozhen throwing out an opening gambit? Most likely. He revealed information, watched for reaction, and tried to measure Liu Qingfeng through what he chose to say, or refused to say. But Liu Qingfeng answered with nothing more dangerous than a mild smile. Li Baozhen waited. When no answer came, he too began to smile. The exchange lasted only moments, yet the contrast was already clear. Li Baozhen possessed youth, vigor, and the instinct to probe. Liu Qingfeng possessed patience. In officialdom, silence could sometimes conceal more blades than eloquence. Kuichan glanced at Liu Qingfeng and finally spoke, his faint smile making the decision sound almost casual.
Liu Qingfeng, in the future, neither of you needs to concern yourselves too much with the major affairs of the Azure Phoenix nation, Fortune Mountain nation, or lofty Sky nation. But when it comes to the smaller matters, make sure you teach Lai Baozhen well.
Liu Qingfeng nodded. He understood. Kui Chan's words quietly defined their positions. Great affairs would be decided above them. Their battlefield would be the countless small matters beneath those grand decisions. The officials, alliances, favors, frictions, and hidden currents through which an empire actually extended its reach. Li Baozhen appeared relaxed. He stepped forward and bowed deeply, this time with unmistakable formality.
Then I'll be in your care, Mr. Leo.
Far from that mountain meeting, another thread of the story rested beside flowing water. It was the River Guardian Temple where Chen Ping'an had once composed writing upon the wall. Recently, several remarkably generous worshippers had arrived and taken up residence directly inside the temple. Strictly speaking, there were 2 people and 1 yellow bull. The temple attendant accepted their incense money with both gratitude and fear, uncertain what manner of guests had suddenly chosen his modest temple as a temporary dwelling. Among them was a young boy dressed in white, with a distinctive birthmark at his glabella. He often wandered the corridors, examining the stone tables with quiet interest. He was Kui Dongshan, and for reasons known only to himself, he had remained in the Azure Phoenix nation. Night descended. A perfectly round moon climbed above the temple roof, pouring silver light across the river and courtyard. Kui Dongshan borrowed a bamboo basket from the temple and walked to the water. He lowered it into the river and returned carrying an entire basketful. Not a single drop escaped through the woven bamboo. Yet that was only the first mystery. On the surface of the captured water floated the reflection of the bright moon. It swayed gently with each step, luminous and untouched. Even when Kui Dongshan entered the darkness beneath the corridor, the moon in the basket remained clear and bright. A basket that should not hold water now held both water and moonlight. In a cultivation world obsessed with great divine abilities, this quiet image carried a different kind of profundity, less like a display of force and more like a riddle about what is real, what is reflected, and what can truly be grasped. Kui Dongshan chose a corridor, sat down, and placed the bamboo basket beside himself. Then he raised his head toward the moon above. There was no noisy company beside him, only water in bamboo and a second moon trembling upon its surface. His thoughts slowly drifted beyond the River Guardian Temple, beyond the Azure Phoenix nation, toward questions that had occupied sages across countless generations. The Buddha worried over the suffering of all living beings. The paramount sage worried that Confucian teachings might become inaccessible, possessed only by those who were already fortunate and well off. But what of the Tao ancestor? It was said that the Tao ancestor was observing a singularity. Perhaps that singularity had something to do with Wang Zhu, once trapped at the bottom of a well. Perhaps it also concerned the old man inside the Yang family's medicine shop. Or perhaps, from the incomprehensibly lofty perspective of the Tao ancestor, every person beneath heaven could be such a singularity. And that possibility is the most unsettling of all. If every ordinary life can become a point upon which heaven and earth quietly turn, then the true scale of destiny may have nothing to do with how grand a person appears at the moment. Kui Dongshan rubbed his cheeks as though trying to push those immense questions aside. From the minimization treasure hidden within his sleeve, he withdrew 2 utterly ordinary-looking jujube wood picture scrolls. He unfurled them, and the 2 scrolls floated silently before him beneath the moonlight. The first picture held an old scholar in worn and shabby clothing, seated at the middle of a bench. Beside him sat Qiqian at roughly 20 years of age. On the other side were the young Zuoyo and Qi Jingchen. 4 people crowded onto the same bench, leaving barely enough room between them. Yet the picture was not nearly so solemn as those names might suggest. Another man had shamelessly shoved his head into the image that should have belonged to the old scholar and his 3 disciples, his head tilted sideways, his smile stretched wide, and he even held up 2 fingers toward the image. In another corner of the same scroll, a large figure squatted with his back toward everyone, apparently unwilling to cooperate with the cheerful scene at all. The second scroll centered on the very man who had forced his face into the first. He stood with both arms stretched outward, the young Zuo Yu hung from one arm, Qi Jingchen from the other, each boy gripping tightly with bent knees and enormous smiles upon their faces. Behind them stood the young Qiqian. His smile was more restrained than the others, but no less genuine. These were not images of imperial preceptors, legendary scholars, or men whose names would later shake mountains and courts. They were simply memories of people who, for one fleeting moment, had been together and happy. Perhaps that was precisely why the scrolls were so precious. Qidongshan stared at those 2 old scenes for a long while. The moon above the corridor remained round. The moon inside the bamboo basket continued to tremble gently. Then, beneath all those profound thoughts about sages, singularities, nations, and the Tao, Qidongshan's mind settled upon something remarkably simple. When would he, Chen Ping'an, and that tanned little girl be able to leave behind a picture scroll like these? For all the schemes unfolding across nations and all the great Tao principles hanging over their heads, perhaps this was the desire that mattered most to Qidongshan in that moment. Not victory, not calculation, not immortality, but the hope that one day, before too much changed, the 3 of them might share a memory worth preserving forever. For the next 2 days, Chen Ping'an took Pei Qian and Zhu Lian through the crowded streets of the Azure Phoenix nation's capital, wandering from shop to shop beneath fluttering banners and the ceaseless murmur of the city. Shiro remained at the inn, guarding their rooms and belongings while the others explored. The capital was livelier than usual. The grand debate between Buddhism and Taoism had drawn scholars, cultivators, wandering experts, and representatives of the 3 teachings and 100 schools of thought from every direction. Some had come chasing fame, others pursued profit, and some, like Chen Ping'an, simply wished to see the sights and purchase a few specialties of the Azure Phoenix nation. Pei Qian and Zhu Lian had long since grown accustomed to Chen Ping'an's fondness for bookshops. Shi Ru, however, was perceptive enough to notice something unusual about the way he browsed. The beautifully printed new editions rarely held Chen Ping'an's attention. Neither did the celebrated classics of the 100 schools. Instead, he repeatedly reached for unofficial histories written by minor officials, local county chronicles from distant nations, miscellaneous geographical records, and even dusty clan genealogies forgotten in obscure corners. He would carefully flick through them, silently committing whatever interested him to memory, and then return them to their shelves without buying a single volume. To an ordinary customer, those forgotten books were scraps of local history. To someone who traveled as far and as often as Chen Ping'an, they could contain clues about mountains, clans, customs, old grudges, and hidden currents that polished classics would never bother recording. Naturally, more than one bookshop owner rolled his eyes at this troublesome customer who read much and purchased little. Fortunately, Zhu Lian was with them. Whenever the old cook had money in his pocket, he spent it with astonishing freedom. His purchases alone were usually enough to prevent the shopkeepers from chasing the entire group out into the street. Pei Qian, meanwhile, had become unexpectedly restrained. She remembered that Chen Ping'an had already spent an extravagant sum during this trip, He had purchased the Azure Phoenix nation's most renowned and costly Xuan paper for himself, a pair of imperial green glazed ghost stone containers for Julian, and a small gourd for her. So whenever Peiqian spotted something she genuinely liked, she merely stole a few extra glances and kept walking. Her treasure box from Yao Jinji was already packed to the brim anyway. There was hardly room for another trinket. For a moment, the little girl seriously considered asking her master for an entirely new treasure box. Then she thought about the grain rain coins Chen Ping'an had earned at the Lion Garden and how much he had already spent on everyone else. After much internal struggle, she decided to wait until the next time her master earned more money. In Peiqian's mind, the conclusion was painfully simple. They were still poor. That realization made her a little melancholy. She had no idea when she would finally possess rows upon rows of treasure boxes, each one overflowing with precious objects. Julian had once told her that truly wealthy clans did not stop at treasure boxes. They owned entire treasure shelves. Only when shelf after shelf had been filled with dazzling rarities could one properly display the magnificence of wealth and make visitors stare until their jaws nearly struck the floor. Peiqian's ambitions might have sounded comical, but they revealed something rather endearing. After traveling through danger after danger, her grand dream at this moment was not dominion over the martial world. It was simply to become rich enough to fill an absurd number of boxes. During their wanderings, however, scraps of far more serious news drifted into their ears. According to Zhu Lian, Emperor Zheng Kuai of the Fortune Mountain Nation possessed tastes unusual enough to earn even his admiration. The ruler cared little for the slender beauties favored by conventional standards. Instead, his four most beloved concubines were all exceptionally heavy-set women, each weighing more than 100 kilograms. Zheng Kui affectionately called them Charming Pig, Charming Dog, Charming Bear, and Charming Sparrow. Yet Charming Pig... Xianxia was far more than an imperial favorite. She stood among the 4 martial arts superior grandmasters recognized across the dozen or so nations of the southeastern treasured vile continent. At present, Emperor Zheng Kuai and all 4 concubines were staying at a relay station inside the Azure Phoenix nation's capital. 2 days earlier, the emperor had changed into ordinary clothing and gone sightseeing through Buddhist and Taoist temples with Charming Sparrow, the slenderest of his 4 favorites. While they were offering incense, a dispute broke out with a group of young masters. Charming Sparrow did not show mercy. She struck directly and beat several of those young masters until they were half dead. The disturbance immediately drew the capital's law enforcement officials. Even senior officials from the Ministry of Rights hurried over, for this was no longer merely a street quarrel. The diplomatic relationship between 2 nations had become entangled in a temple brawl. After great effort, the authorities established that the troublemakers were young masters from influential clans in the capital, accompanied by wealthy friends visiting from the north. Once those men learned that the stranger they had offended was none other than Emperor Zheng Kui, their fury cooled remarkably quickly. That conflict had barely been settled when the capital was struck by something far darker. Several people who had only recently moved into a new residence were discovered dead in horrifying circumstances. The scene was so gruesome that rumors claimed even the coroner nearly vomited while examining the remains. Soon, a rumor spread across the entire capital like wildfire. People swore that the killer had employed methods associated with Charming Pig Xianxia. The victims had been dismembered, their heads left attached to their torsos. Worse still, several acupoints had been struck to rob them of speech and slow their bleeding, prolonging their deaths. That detail was precisely what made the accusations so explosive. The murders did not merely look brutal. They looked deliberately distinctive, almost as though someone wanted the entire capital to recognize a particular martial artist's signature. Whether that pointed toward guilt or toward a frame-up was another matter entirely. The Azure Phoenix Imperial Court reacted swiftly. Experienced officials from the Ministry of Justice were dispatched alongside Imperial Immortal Guest Elders and renowned cultivators from the wider cultivation world. Their destination was the relay station housing Emperor Jianghu. But official action could not extinguish public fury. Scholars and officials gathered in enormous numbers outside the relay station, surrounding it with accusations and righteous anger. Only the capital's law enforcement officers and 200 elite infantry, personally deployed by Chief Military Governor Wei Liang, prevented the gathering from collapsing into chaos. The soldiers watched the crowd with sharp, unwavering eyes. Without that barrier, powerless scholars facing the wrath of one of Jianghu's 4 concubines might have discovered just how fragile righteous outrage became before genuine martial strength. Then Charming Pig Yuanye issued a challenge. She named Zhu Fengxian of the Great Marsh Gang, another of the 4 martial arts superior grandmasters in the southeastern region. If Yuanye lost, the Fortune Mountain Nation would accept the accusations leveled against them. If she won, every Azure Phoenix scholar blindly making trouble outside the relay station would have to kowtow and apologize. Zhu Fengxian was no harmless old retiree. In his prime, rumors spoke of old Demon Zhu riding through the cultivation world in a sanguine horse-drawn carriage, leaving havoc and bloodshed across several nations. And by coincidence, or perhaps by someone's careful design, he was currently inside the Azure Phoenix capital, staying at a Daoist temple. Yesterday, the notorious old gang leader stepped back into the spotlight. To the astonishment of many, Zhu Fengxian accepted Yuanye's challenge and entered the relay station as though carrying the honor of the entire Azure Phoenix nation upon his shoulders. From the moment his carriage left the Daoist temple until it reached the relay station, commoners and cultivators packed the roads. Voices thundered through the streets as people waved and shouted for the old grandmaster who had once terrified the jianghu. Yet anticipation could not change the balance of strength. Zhu Fengxian, carrying the hopes of countless people, proved no match for Yuanye, who ranked second among the 4 superior grandmasters. He was crushed in the life-and-death battle, severely wounded, and eventually lifted from the ground by his neck, as though all that old fame weighed nothing at all. Yuanye emerged from the relay station drenched in blood, yet comparatively unharmed. Zhu Fengxian hung limp in her grasp. She swept her gaze across the previously roaring crowd. No one spoke. Then she tossed the unconscious Zhu Fengxian onto the street and reminded everyone to return the following day to kowtow. One battle had overturned an entire city's mood. Moments earlier, Zhu Fengxian had been greeted as a returning hero. Moments later, his defeat transformed national pride into humiliation. In the martial world, reputation could take decades to build and only a few exchanges to shatter. His disciples, many with tears in their eyes, hurried him into the horse-drawn carriage and rushed him back to the Daoist temple for treatment. Outside the relay station, silence reigned. Outside the Daoist temple, people wailed without end. Chen Ping'an happened to hear this entire account while browsing a bookshop. After hearing it, he simply continued looking through the shelves. Pei Qian did not feel particularly sorry for Zhu Fengxian. In her eyes, the old man had simply chosen a miserable road for himself. If he was not strong enough, why insist on stepping forward and gambling his reputation? He could have remained quietly inside the Daoist temple. Now he had nearly been beaten to death, and his fame had suffered alongside his body. According to the Jianghu novels Pei Qian had read, a martial artist who lost both strength and reputation was practically finished. Still, one thing earned Zhu Fengxian a small measure of sympathy from her. During their previous journey toward the Golden Osmanthus Temple, Chen Ping'an's group had stayed in the luxurious mountain residence Zhu Fengxian built for his granddaughter. The old gang leader was rich, generous, and willing to spend freely. Pei-chan appreciated qualities like that. Unfortunately, even if old geezer Zhu survived, Pei-chan suspected there would be little chance of freeloading off him again. Their connection had begun by pure chance. They had once sheltered from a downpour together before climbing the mountain together. In the end, Zhu Fengxian's granddaughter Zhu Ziyang and Liu Qingcheng of the lofty Sky Nation's Blusher Hall were both accepted as direct disciples of old immortal Jianghu of the Golden Osmanthus Temple. Chen Ping'an and Pei-chan had even watched that disciple recruiting ceremony. It had been burdened with so many elaborate formalities that it stretched close to an hour. Pei-chan had stood there from beginning to end like a wooden puppet, enduring such a terrible headache that she decided the ceremony was somehow more exhausting than transcribing texts. By noon, Chen Ping'an finally stepped out of the bookshop. He stood upon the stone steps outside, looking into the bustling street, yet his thoughts had clearly wandered somewhere far beyond it.
Young master, what are your thoughts?
Shiro immediately grew anxious. Deep inside, she silently prayed that Chen Ping'an would not decide to plunge into another pool of muddy water. His eventual answer left her half relieved and half worried.
We'll head over to the Daoist temple to visit Zhu Fengxian. If his injuries are serious, I happen to have some alchemical pills that I can give him. After greeting him and delivering the medicine, we'll leave.
That was Chen Ping'an's line in the sand. He would not blindly charge into a dispute between two nations, nor investigate murders he knew almost nothing about. But an old acquaintance lay wounded nearby, and helping that person was a different matter. Loyalty did not require recklessness.
Young master is a loyal friend, and more importantly, young master can still act with calm and prudence in such a situation.
Pei-chan immediately glared at the old cook.
Why are you stealing my words? Old cook, what am I meant to do now?
What are you meant to do now? You can go and eat shit. You won't need to spend any money. And if you're still not full, give me a yell and wait outside the toilet after we return to the inn. I guarantee it'll still be warm.
How disgusting.
Chen Ping'an ignored them. Arguments between Julian and Pei-chan had long since become as ordinary as eating and drinking. After asking passers-by for directions, the group headed toward the Daoist temple that had become famous throughout the capital almost overnight. Roughly an hour later, they reached the area outside the temple. A sparse crowd lingered beyond its walls. Some people cursed, threw a few rocks over the wall, and left. Others simply circled the perimeter, satisfied once they had seen the place currently sitting at the center of the capital's storm. There were also cultivators who had rushed here after hearing the news. Some likely had fathers or ancestors who had once suffered under the Great Marsh Gang. Yet none of them dared to unleash the same reckless abuse as the ordinary crowd. They understood the realities of the jianghu too well. No one knew whether Zhu Fengxian would live or die. More importantly, several notorious Great Marsh Gang disciples were still standing guard inside. Even one of those disciples could likely defeat ordinary martial elites of the Azure Phoenix nation. Hatred was one thing. Volunteering to test whether a wounded tiger still possessed claws was another. The cultivators outside understood that distinction perfectly. The Daoist temple itself was modest in size, and its doors were closed to visitors. Chen Ping'an went to a side entrance and knocked for a long while before a young Daoist priest finally opened the door with a guarded expression. Chen Ping'an explained that he was an old acquaintance of gang leader Zhu, and asked the priest to pass along a message that Chen Ping'an had come to visit. The young priest nodded and told them to wait. He closed the door again. 7 or 8 minutes later, he returned with one of Zhu Fengxian's disciples, the same man who had accompanied Zhu Fengxian and Zhu Ziyang on their journey to the Golden Osmanthus Temple. The disciple visibly relaxed when he recognized Chen Ping'an. He led the group deeper into the Daoist temple. speaking little beyond polite thanks, that Chen Ping'an still remembered their old acquaintance. The smell of medicine thickened as they approached a building in the inner grounds. Several disciples of Zhu Fengxian stood solemnly along the corridor. They acknowledged Chen Ping'an with small nods, but not one of them relaxed. Their caution was understandable. Chen Ping'an and Zhu Fengxian had only shared a brief encounter on the road to the Golden Osmanthus Temple. Human intentions were difficult to measure, especially when a gang leader lay gravely wounded, and enemies might be watching from every shadow. Had Zhu Fengxian himself not ordered his disciples to admit Chen Ping'an and his companions, no one guarding the temple would have dared open the door. Chen Ping'an asked Zhu Lian, Shi Ru, and Pei Qian to remain in the corridor. None of them were allowed to approach the sick room. A direct disciple opened the door, and Chen Ping'an entered alone, still carrying the sword and bamboo bookcase on his back. Inside, Zhu Fengxian rested against a pillow with a blanket over him. His face was deathly pale. Even so, when Chen Ping'an entered, the old gang leader managed a faint smile.
After bidding farewell on the mountain, we've now reunited in a foreign land. Yet I'm actually in such a pitiful state right now. Apologies for this embarrassing display. Young Master Chen.
One glance was enough for Chen Ping'an to understand. Zhu Fengxian's injuries were indeed severe. An old, expressionless Daoist priest also stood inside the room. After Zhu Fengxian's direct disciple entered and closed the door, the priest carried a chair over for Chen Ping'an, then returned to his original position. He had no intention of leaving Zhu Fengxian alone with an armed visitor. If Chen Ping'an suddenly drew his sword, the priest intended to be there. Chen Ping'an placed his bamboo bookcase beside his feet and sat down.
Gang leader Zhu, you didn't conceal your identity when entering the capital.
Zhu Fengxian coughed before forcing another tired smile.
Of course, I tried to conceal my identity. However, the imperial court has a strong intelligence network, and I wasn't able to hide myself properly. This Daoist temple in the capital is actually a division of the Great Marsh Gang. We've spent 30 years building and maintaining it. Even so, it's entirely possible that the imperial court has been watching this place for a long time already. That shouldn't matter too much. The emperor of the Azure Phoenix nation yearned for the cultivation world when he was young. After ascending the throne, he treated the jianghu fairly well. As long as grudges and revenge killings don't go too far, the imperial court rarely interferes. In fact, Emperor Tanglai was still the crown prince when I marched through several nations and defeated everyone in my path. I heard that he admired me greatly. He once announced that he would definitely summon me to the palace one day because I was a martial artist who had earned face for the Azure Phoenix nation. So although I knew something was wrong when Charming Pig suddenly singled me out, I couldn't bring myself to quietly flee the capital.
His voice had become broken and weak from the effort. Seeing this, Chen Ping'an chose not to press him with further questions. Zhu Fengxian understood that he had been pushed onto a dangerous stage, yet pride, reputation, and his old connection to the Azure Phoenix nation made retreat almost impossible. The trap, if it truly was a trap, had been designed around the old martial artist's character, rather than merely his strength. Chen Ping'an bent down and opened his bamboo bookcase. At once, both the old Daoist priest and Zhu Fengxian's direct disciple tensed, their bodies prepared instinctively for violence. Chen Ping'an stopped moving.
I have several bottles of alchemical pills from the mountains. They aren't miracle medicines capable of instantly repairing wounds or restoring damaged acupoints, but they are quite effective at replenishing Kai and nurturing the soul. They should also help repair a martial artist's body.
Zhu Fengxian tried to raise one arm, but his strength failed him. He could only place his hand upon the blanket and weakly gesture for his two loyal subordinates to stand down.
There's no need to be anxious. My judgment of character is better than my martial arts. Right now, anyone else in this capital might sneak here to target me, but young Master Chen is the exception.
Chen Ping'an had anticipated this exact difficulty. On the way to the temple, he had deliberately taken a secluded alley and transferred 3 bottles of alchemical pills from his pocket treasure into his bamboo bookcase, producing medicine from thin air before strangers would have attracted unnecessary attention. Even in an act of kindness, Chen Ping'an remained careful about what he revealed. In the cultivation world, possessing a treasure could be dangerous long before anyone understood exactly what that treasure was. He removed the 3 bottles and handed them to the old Daoist priest.
Spiritual Master, please examine these pills first and determine whether they are suitable for gang leader Zhu's injuries.
Zhu Fengxian could not help chuckling despite the pain.
Young Master Chen, you're giving away life-saving medicine out of goodwill, yet I've never seen anyone look quite so wronged while doing it. You might be the first person in the world.
The old Taoist priest accepted the bottles without changing expression. At the table, he poured out 1 pill from each bottle, produced a silver needle from his sleeve, and carefully broke the pills apart for inspection. Chen Ping'an took no offense. Far from it. He considered the old priest's caution exactly what one should expect from a genuine cultivator protecting a wounded companion. Despite his deathly complexion, Zhu Fengxian's spirits remained surprisingly steady. Much of that resilience came from the deep foundation of a 7th-tier martial artist. The direct disciple quietly signaled that perhaps it was time to end the visit. Zhu Fengxian ignored him.
Young Master Chen, do you think Charming Pig is truly the culprit?
Chen Ping'an shook his head.
I've never met her and I don't know her character or temperament, so I can't say for certain. Logically speaking, an imperial consort of the Fortune Mountain nation shouldn't be foolish enough to use one of her own distinctive methods to brutally murder several people in the capital of another nation. It also seems unlikely that she would do so merely as a diversion, although that possibility can't be completely excluded. In the end, this affair may simply become an arm wrestle between 2 nations in the southeastern treasured Vile continent. If that happens, whether you and Yi truly committed the murders might no longer be the most important question. That is why accepting her challenge wasn't worth it for you. Meanwhile, whoever arranged for you to be dragged into this is quite clever. When you eventually leave the capital gang leader, Zhu, you should be especially careful.
Chen Ping'an saw beyond the question of individual guilt. A murder case had already transformed into diplomacy, public fury, national pride, and a contest between martial legends. Once that happened, truth itself risked becoming only one piece on a much larger board. And the most unsettling detail was Zhu Fengxian's role. Someone had known exactly where he was, exactly what name would stir the Azure Phoenix nation, and exactly what sort of challenge an old grandmaster burdened by reputation would find difficult to refuse. Whether the hidden hand belonged to one person or a greater force remained unknown, but the arrangement was far too neat to dismiss lightly. At the table, the old Taoist priest had been completely focused on examining the medicine. Yet after hearing Chen Ping'an's reasoning, he finally raised his head and gave the young swordsman a careful glance. At the table, the old Taoist priest had been completely focused on examining the medicine. Yet after hearing Chen Ping'an's reasoning, he finally raised his head and gave the young swordsman a careful glance. Chen Ping'an remained only a little longer. Once their conversation ended, he rose and prepared to leave. Zhu Fengxian was too injured to stand and see his guest out. He could only struggle to cup his fists from the bed. The movement pulled at his wounds, and another fit of coughing seized him. Chen Ping'an rejoined Julian, Shiro, and Peiqian outside. The four of them left the Daoist temple behind and returned toward the inn, while the capital continued to boil with rumors, humiliation, political pressure, and unanswered questions. For now, Chen Ping'an had done exactly what he promised. Visit an old acquaintance, offer medicine, and walk away from the center of the storm. But in a capital where murder, diplomacy, martial reputation, and unseen schemes were already intertwined, simply recognizing that a hidden hand existed might prove important later. After returning to Zhu Fengxian's room, the disciple who had escorted Chen Ping'an and his companions out of the Daoist temple lingered near the doorway. His lips moved as though words were pressing against them, yet hesitation kept those words trapped inside.
What is it you're thinking of asking Chen Ping'an to escort us out of the capital?
If you were willing to help us, that would naturally be the safest outcome. He came here personally to visit you gang leader Zhu. That proves he bears goodwill toward the Great Marsh gang. If we persuaded him just a little perhaps.
A cold chuckle cut the thought apart before it could bloom into hope. Zhu Fengxian had spent decades amid blades, grudges, alliances, and betrayals. To him, there were favors one could accept, and favors one must never demand.
Foolish. A person who is never satisfied is like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. Did you pretend not to hear Chen Ping'an warning us to be careful when leaving the capital? His meaning could hardly have been clearer. He brought medicine because he remembered the friendship born from our chance encounter in the mountains. By coming here and delivering those pills, he has already honored that relationship beyond what anyone could demand. Do you understand? Never mistake another person's kindness for stupidity, and never keep reaching for more simply because they offered you a hand once.
This was not merely pride speaking. In the cultivation world, favors were invisible debts. Zhu Fengxian understood that forcing Chen Ping'an to risk his life today might consume the goodwill that could someday save Zhujiang. A veteran of the jianghu knew that relationships survived precisely because one knew when not to exploit them. The disciple understood every word. Unfortunately, understanding danger did nothing to make that danger smaller.
But the situation we're facing is simply too dangerous.
Zhu Fengxian sighed. The fear in his disciple's heart was understandable, but fear was precisely when a person's principles became easiest to abandon.
Fortunately, you stopped yourself before making things worse. Suppose Xiang encounters trouble while cultivating at the Golden Summit Daoist temple someday. If Chen Ping'an happens to be nearby, do you think he would still help her after we shamelessly pressured him today?
The disciple fell silent. From this Daoist temple to the capital gates, and from the capital back toward the Great Marsh Gang's territory, countless stretches of road awaited them. Any one of those stretches might become their final road. Yet Zhu Fengxian smiled with surprising ease. He had injured others. He had defeated others. He had watched countless martial artists fall beneath the merciless rules of the cultivation world. He had no intention of declaring himself exempt now that death might be walking toward him.
Enough. Once a person enters the cultivation world, they should bear responsibility for their own life and death. What are other people allowed to be weaker than me and die beneath my hands, while I alone must never be killed? Am I somehow the owner of the cultivation world, with the entire jianghu, nothing more than the Great Marsh Gang's private pond?
30 or 40 years ago in the Azure Phoenix nation, it almost felt that way.
Zhu Fengxian closed his eyes. For an instant, the room became quiet enough that the weight of several decades seemed to settle upon the old gang leader's shoulders. The old Daoist priest, who had been examining Chen Ping'an's medicine, finally looked over.
There is nothing wrong with these pills. Their quality is extremely high, and they certainly cost a small fortune. They will not merely suppress gang leader Zhu's injuries for a short while. These medicines can treat the wounds at their root and genuinely help him recover.
Truly,
You doubt my judgment.
I wouldn't dare.
This old Taoist was no ordinary physician passing through the capital. For decades he had served as the Great Marsh Gang's military advisor, tirelessly weighing schemes, dangers, alliances, and opportunities. It was also his sharp eye that had helped Zhu Xiang step onto the path of cultivation while still young. Then Zhu Fengxian suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze had changed. He ordered his disciple outside. Only after the door closed did the old gang leader finally speak to the companion who had advised him for most of a lifetime.
Tell me what you truly want. Why did you suddenly scheme against me after helping me for so many years? Whatever the answer, I won't resent you. I only ask one thing. You and whoever stands behind this matter look after Xiang afterward. Let her cultivate peacefully in the mountains. Don't drag her into this storm.
There was almost no anger in Zhu Fengxian's accusation. That made the moment heavier. He had already accepted the possibility that an old companion had betrayed him. What remained important was not revenge, but ensuring Zhu Xiang survived the consequences. For a man facing death, his final bargaining chip was not wealth or martial prestige. It was trust accumulated across decades. The old Taoist rose and walked over to the chair Chen Ping'an had occupied earlier. Rather than answer the accusation, he changed the subject.
Old Zhu, that Chen Ping'an is remarkably mature for someone so young. People of our generation are becoming less welcome in the cultivation world. Youngsters nowadays cast aside old rules and tradition. Some would even overturn their own masters if doing so helped them climb higher. The customs we once relied upon no longer bind everyone.
Zhu Fengxian studied the face opposite him. Something about that face had always been strange. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was far too familiar.
Exactly how old are you? You looked almost the same when I first met you. Nearly 60 years have passed, and you're still wandering around with that same face.
The old Taoist considered the question before offering an answer that revealed almost nothing.
Up to now, I've spent roughly half my time traveling through my homeland, and the other half wandering around the Azure Phoenix nation.
Zhu Fengxian did not press him. An old friend unwilling to answer after 60 years would not suddenly reveal his secrets because of one more question. Elsewhere, the Azure Phoenix nation's capital had already become a furnace of resentment. A confrontation inside a temple had erupted between Fortune Mountain Nation's Emperor Jianghu and several young masters from prestigious capital clans, together with wealthy acquaintances who had traveled south from the north. Jianghu's concubine, charming pig Yuan-Ye, had responded with terrifying brutality. Those young men were beaten until they were left half dead, and later that same night, several people were violently killed. Fear spread through the capital, but alongside fear came rage. Residents began directing their hatred toward the visiting envoy from the Fortune Mountain Nation, while wealthy clans that had migrated south into the Azure Phoenix Nation burned with equal fury. The conflict was no longer personal. It was becoming a confrontation between nations. Yuan-Ye had openly challenged Zhu Fengxian, another of the 4 martial arts superior grandmasters. Their clash ended with Zhu Fengxian severely wounded. Yet afterward, not a single spectator returned to the relay station to bow before Yuan-Ye. Humiliated by that silent rejection, Yuan-Ye publicly mocked the character of Azure Phoenix Nation scholars. Her words landed like sparks upon dry grass. The capital erupted once more. Soon, the dispute with Fortune Mountain Nation overshadowed even the grand debate between Buddhism and Taoism. Wealthy families that had migrated south joined hands with local clans, applying pressure upon Azure Phoenix Nation's Emperor Tang Li. Meanwhile, Emperor Jianghu prepared to swagger out of the capital accompanied by his 4 concubines, to many cultivators of the Azure Phoenix nation, the sight was intolerable. Within only a few days, anger among martial artists, resentment among scholars, pressure from great clans, and tension between 2 courts all began reinforcing one another. What looked like spontaneous chaos was, in truth, far too perfectly connected. Someone had not merely lit a fire, they had arranged the firewood beforehand and waited for everyone else to provide the sparks. Then Chen Ping'an and his companions left the capital of the Azure Phoenix nation. That night, beneath a dark sky outside the Lion Garden, a horse-drawn carriage rolled slowly along a narrow road. The man holding the reins looked like an ordinary old carriage driver. He was anything but ordinary. Beneath the disguise stood the strongest of the 4 martial arts superior grandmasters in the southeastern region of the eastern treasured vile continent. He was an exceptionally tall old man who had secretly entered the Azure Phoenix nation from the lofty Sky Nation. His martial cultivation had reached the far-roaming tier. Compared with 7th-tier grandmasters such as Xianxia and Zhu Fengxian, the gulf in power was vast. This single reveal quietly changed the power balance. Zhu Fengxian and Xianxia were already figures capable of shaking a nation's martial world, yet the disguised driver stood considerably above both. Whoever had placed such a person behind the reins was moving pieces far beyond the level of ordinary gang rivalries. Inside the carriage, Liu Qingfeng finished reading an intelligence report from the Green Ripple Pavilion.
It's time to stop.
The handsome young master sitting opposite him gave a faint smile.
Stop already. I had intended to borrow some official authority for private business and meet a certain person. Unfortunately, it seems they haven't taken the bait.
It's time to stop.
The young man opposite him was none other than Li Baozhen of Dragon Spring Prefecture. He studied Liu Qingfeng for a moment, then yielded with a smile.
Very well. Since Mr. Liu says we should stop ill, follow Imperial Preceptor quiz instruction, and learn from you. Besides, this was merely a small appetizer for Emperor Tang, lie after my appointment here.
At least now he won't mistakenly believe that leaning against the powerful Cloud Forest Zhang clan means he can sleep without worries. Sometimes even sinister wind and cold rain are enough to leave serious wounds.
Liu Qingfeng did not answer. His silence carried neither agreement nor objection. As the carriage approached the Lion Garden, Li Baozhen suddenly spoke again.
I want enter. I'll remain with the carriage while Mr. Liu discusses proper business with the old assistant minister. Once you're finished, we can return to the county office together.
Liu Qingfeng stepped down and entered the Lion Garden alone beneath the night sky. Li Baozhen climbed out as well, but instead of stepping onto the ground, he settled beside the disguised old grandmaster at the front of the carriage. Like Chen Ping'an, Li Baozhen had once walked out of the jewel-small world. With nothing else demanding his attention, he idly swung his legs.
Whenever I remember that my precious little sister calls Chen Ping'an Jr. uncle, I get annoyed. But what can I do? I'm little Beoping's older brother. I can't bear to scold her. So naturally I can only entertain that little bumpkin from Clay Vase Alley instead. If he hadn't escorted little Beoping to the great Sui nation, then Yuan Yi and Zhu Fengxian would never have ended up merely fighting each other like this.
The casual tone only made the implication colder. To Li Baozhen, a feud between superior grandmasters, unrest inside a capital, and pressure upon an emperor could all be described as entertainment.
What I admire most about the Imperial Preceptor is still his ability to predict how people will think and act. Everyone plants spies in everyone else's backyard. Back then, even the great Lai capital was crawling with them, from the palace of eternal spring to the people, besides song changing. Even our emperor wasn't exempt. Wasn't there a powerful figure from the 100 schools of thought assisting him, while harboring motives of their own? But now that the game has reached its closing stages, we can examine the entire Go board again. Maybe we suffered a small loss here, but gained far more somewhere else. In the end, the overall position favors our imperial preceptor. That is what makes him terrifying.
The Go board metaphor was more than clever rhetoric. To Kui-chan's camp, nations, clans, martial experts, officials, and personal grudges were interconnected positions. A sacrifice did not necessarily mean defeat. A victory did not necessarily mean success. What mattered was whether the entire board moved closer to the desired ending. After talking for a long while, Baozhen turned toward the old driver.
Even with my present position, I still can't access your records. Tell me, why are you willing to serve the Great Lie Empire?
I hope you never stumble in your political career. If you do ill, be the first to rush over and kill you.
Baozhen showed no fear whatsoever.
You really should change that habit of saying exactly what you think. At minimum, save words like those until the day you actually find an opportunity to kill me.
Fine. I'll say them again when that day arrives.
Silence settled around the carriage. Liu Qingfeng had still not returned from the Lion Garden.
Is the cultivation world enjoyable?
No. People die very easily there.
Is that so? Then I suppose I should restrain myself. I only recently arrived here anyway. I'll learn the local customs first. I've never been particularly courageous. Back home, there were simply too many powerful beings. Even making a little noise on the street could make me wonder whether I had disturbed some nearby terrestrial immortal or martial arts superior grandmaster.
He lightly slapped both knees, amusement flickering across his face.
People say fellow townsmen meeting in foreign lands should have tears in their eyes. I wonder which one of us will cry the next time I meet that little bumpkin surnamed Chen.
Then his thoughts shifted toward another person from the past, Zhu Lu.
That foolish girl Zhu Lu wept uncontrollably when she found me in the capital back then. I was furious enough that I nearly struck her dead. The task I gave her was so simple, yet she still ruined everything. Because of her failure, Her Majesty reprimanded me, and I lost my chance to climb through the Great Lie Imperial Court. Otherwise, why would I need to come to a miserable place like this and slowly work my way upward?
The old driver let out a quiet chuckle.
A sinister man like you will meet an exceptionally cruel fate when the day finally comes that you lose your position.
There you go again, saying exactly what you think. Why won't you learn? It truly is an awful habit.
Night deepened around the Lion Garden. Baozhen stared toward the estate and gave another soft laugh.
Mr. Liu is actually far more pitiful than I am. At worst, I'm merely filled with schemes, so more and more people will fear me as time passes. But he carries pains he cannot speak aloud. As the years pass, the number of people who curse him will only grow.
Baozhen's observation revealed a different kind of battlefield. A martial artist might endure wounds upon the body, while a strategist or official could be forced to endure hatred from people who would never understand why certain choices were made. In this chapter, blades were dangerous, but reputation, loyalty, and political necessity could wound just as deeply. Back inside the Azure Phoenix nation's capital, another hidden confrontation was unfolding within a small relay station. The building itself was unimpressive, but on this night it was a place of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Behind one closed door, two figures glared at each other like enemies preparing to overturn the entire Go board. A young boy dressed in white pointed furiously at an old man in azure. A birthmark rested between the boy's brows, but there was nothing serene about his expression now.
Old bastard, didn't we agree that this gamble would follow the rules and neither side would use powers beyond the Go board? Yet you threw Baozhen into the Azure Phoenix nation at exactly this moment. With his personality, how could he possibly resist using official authority to settle private grudges? Have you no shame at all?
The old man in azure remained utterly expressionless.
Little boy, are you truly in a position to call me shameless? who secretly sent word to Chen Ping'an and told him to block the road leading toward the Lion Garden.
Dongshan's anger only intensified.
You broke the rules first. You were trying to ruin the foundation of my great Tao by setting a trap around Chen Ping'an. What you're allowed to strike me, but am forbidden from striking back.
And then came the absurd truth behind this furious quarrel. The white-robed youth was Dongshan. The azure-robed elder was embroidered tiger Chan. In a sense, one person was arguing with himself. Their confrontation was almost comical on the surface, yet the implications were profound. They shared an origin, but their present paths, priorities, and relationships had diverged so drastically that the two could now sabotage, accuse, and calculate against one another like rival strategists. Few conflicts in the cultivation world could be stranger than fighting another version of oneself. Chan calmly wiped the spittle from his face.
Is cursing yourself really that entertaining?
Extremely.
Looking at this pathetic performance of yours, I finally understand why my cultivation back then could only reach the peak of the 12th tier.
Dongshan dropped heavily into a chair.
If I had known Yao would become such a useless old thing, I would have strangled myself long ago.
It still isn't too late. Just remember to leave your immortal body and pocket treasure behind for me.
Dongshan rolled his eyes and collapsed forward across the table, arms spread wide and one cheek pressed against the wood. Then his tone changed.
The emperor is dead. Song Changjing will soon serve as protector and temporary ruler.
Chan nodded.
Then who becomes the next emperor? Or will the two original heirs divide the power between them?
Chan simply ignored him. Dongshan slowly raised his head, then abandoned the table and slumped back into his chair.
How boring.
You seem rather pleased with being that person's disciple.
Dongshan answered only by rolling his eyes again. Chan found himself faintly puzzled. This ability to seek amusement amid hardship and sorrow did not resemble the personality he remembered having in his own youth. Eventually, Dongshan stopped fooling around. After hesitating for a moment, he asked about someone far away on Downtrodden Mountain. Chan remained silent for a long time before answering.
Lu Chen completely severed his path toward the 11th tier. Even so, his state of mind has been fairly good lately.
Dongshan crossed his legs on the chair. Then he asked the question hanging behind everything that had happened around the Lion Garden.
What will you do if Chen Ping'an beats Lai Baozhen to death?
Chan shook his head.
Chen Ping'an once promised Lai Zisheng that he would spare Lai Baozhen exactly once. After that, each side will bear responsibility for its own life and death.
Dongshan suddenly raised his head. For once, the playful expression disappeared. He stared at Chan in stunned silence.
Correct. I calculated that possibility already, and placed the necessary restraints around it. Lai Baozhen is still too young and inexperienced. If he is to become truly useful in the future, he needs to suffer some setbacks first.
There it was, the frightening depth of embroidered tiger's planning. Even Li Baozhen, one of his own pieces, was not being protected from hardship. Chan was willing to let valuable people approach danger if the experience would sharpen them. His control did not mean preventing every crisis. It meant deciding which crises were survivable and useful. Dongshan immediately burst into laughter. He jumped from the chair, hurried behind Chan, and began enthusiastically massaging the old man's shoulders.
Ahoy! As expected of the other me. Old Kui, I falsely accused you. Don't be angry. Calm down, calm down.
Chan remained unmoved.
If I had known someone like you would emerge in the future, perhaps I truly should have strangled myself back then.
Dongshan lightly smacked the back of Chan's head.
What unlucky nonsense are you saying? Tui tui tui. No matter how differently our great Tao paths develop, we should both strive to become bad people who refuse to die.
If you spit on my head again, you can forget about becoming a bad person who refuses to die.
Their exchange was ridiculous, dangerous, and strangely revealing at the same time. Yet beneath the insults lay an unmistakable truth. Both versions of Qichen were still wrestling over Chen Ping'an, Li Baozhen, the great Tao, and the future shape of an enormous game whose boundaries extended far beyond the Azure Phoenix nation. Meanwhile, on the narrow path that wound past the reed thicket and connected the lion garden with the official road, the horse-drawn carriage suddenly slowed. Then it stopped. The old carriage driver, the far-roaming tier superior grandmaster, whose martial cultivation towered over Zhu Fengxian and Yuanye, instantly became tense. Not wary, not cautious, tense, as though a truly formidable enemy stood ahead. Li Baozhen sensed the change and pulled aside the carriage curtain. The moment he saw the figure blocking their path, disbelief swept across his face. A fellow townsman. Here, of all places. And after Li Baozhen had spent the entire night wondering which fellow townsman would shed tears when they next met, fate, or perhaps someone else's calculation, had already placed that meeting directly in his path, with even a far-roaming tier grandmaster treating the newcomer like a powerful enemy. This reunion was unlikely to begin with embraces and nostalgia.